What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Metal Maniacs Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Ingersoll, and I'm here with my co-host.
It's your boy, Mod.
All right, today we got a bio episode for you, another one that I was looking forward to. Nick's going to take the reins on this one, so it should be a good, informative time. So what are we talking about today, my man?
Man, I got to take it back to 1985 for you, Jason. We're going to talk about one of my personal favorite bands, Carcass.
Nice.
I know you're a fan, probably as big as I am, right there next to me anyway. So yeah, I spent the last couple months thinking about this, but really putting in the work in the last, couple of weeks, forming outlines and just getting ideas and kind of working with some of their words and imagery. So, yeah. Did you want to talk about them a little bit, or you want me to just dive right in? Because we could talk about them for a second before I just dive into everything.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was one of another band that you showed me, right? Another band that I was familiar with through you.
Okay.
And kind of jumped in the middle, like we spoke before. I think it was Heartwork that kind of set me off. And of course, you hear that, and it's got that perfect mix of, and we talked about this on our top 10 albums.
Right.
Heartwork was one of them, right?
Absolutely.
So just had that perfect mix of like grind, melodic, songwriting, just a great record overall.
Yeah, great production value.
Yep.
Great musicianship, great songwriting, great melody.
The lyrics were badass.
Lyrics are so good.
Good.
The topics were something you could relate to, and that kind of that falls in line with what we were talking about when we discussed Death and Chuck.
Yep.
Like those lyrics were valuable, especially at a certain point in the career where we jump in with like Human or Symbolic, Carcass, Heartwork. Like those lyrics are something you can get something out of.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you go backwards in time on the Carcass timeline, and it starts to get real dicey.
Yeah, a little rough.
A lot rough.
Yeah, a lot rough. I remember just consuming that, though. Like, we were like, oh, we're hardcore metalheads. So I don't know if you remember this, but it was one of those things, we're 16, 17 years old, something like that. It was like the whole stay the night at my house or whatever type thing. And then you came over, and my stepmom had like a condo out in like Spring Lake area. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was kind of like when my dad was first getting with my stepmom and my stepsister Lisa.
Yeah.
But I remember us like going to the mall, and I swear you had bought the like symphonies and Recaputrefaction like that day or something.
Yeah.
Which might be these copies right here.
Likely.
Here. But I remember us like sitting there like listening to them at that condo out in Spring Lake, and I just remember like I don't think we judged it the same way we would judge it now, just because of our bird's eye view of what the music to us should sound like or whatever.
Right.
We were just like, cool, more Carcass shit. I don't know if you must not remember that. I mean, there's been a lot.
I do remember.
There's a whole timeline in between us being 16 and now in our 40s. But
I know I remember it. I vaguely remember it because I remember I think you bought some Death CDs too, maybe, and then we listened to those. But yeah, Carcass is one where you jump in from the middle. It's gravy. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
But then it's not the same as maybe going backwards in time with Death. It gets real jagged real quick. Like there's not like several albums prior to Heartwork that you can really get into in the same capacity.
Right.
But that's the beauty of Carcass. Like from every album, there's a huge progression.
Oh yeah.
From one to every single one, from one to the next, there's like a huge progression in a variety and a difference. So I went back and I listened to next to all of these almost 100% through. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I listened to the whole catalog, but what I did do for everyone on the planet is I listened to Reek of Putrefaction, 22 tracks, so that you don't have to.
Yeah. Thanks for that, because you messaged me and I was at work and I was like, okay, we're doing Carcass, so I'm going to go back through and listen to some. I actually recently had been listening to Carcass, and most of these I've spun so many times that it's been, played out that I know what's going on. But I was like, I haven't listened to that in a while. And you were like, it's bad. And I'm like, I'm going to have to check this for myself. So I turned it on, and like 2 songs in, I'm like, I just can't even do this. This is like worse than. I mean, it's right along there with like the shittiest black metal recordings. Almost, it's just bad. It's sloppy. It's. I can't even believe coming from that they were able to spawn this career. So I mean, the perseverance, kudos to them and their progression in getting better. But like that thing is just a pile, bro.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a pile.
They will pretty much tell you that too in some form or another, and I think they enjoy it these days just because of what it spawned, the whole genre and its likeness, and they just laugh at the illegible band names, and they're the same as us probably, where it's like, what does that say? What does that mean? What are you doing? What are you doing? I don't even hear what you're doing.
Grindcore.
Yeah,
I mean that's what it was.
Yeah. So that was hard for me going back and discovering it at first, and it was just as hard listening to it again, thinking, oh, it's probably better than you remember. Like, there's got to be something there discernible in the mix.
Yeah.
Nope.
No. Like I said, I was 3 songs in. I was just you only have so much time on this planet, and it just really wasn't even worth my time to go back.
I don't like to like treat music like something in the background, but I just needed a little something to do besides listen to this, and I kept coming back to the track to say, oh, did it end? Did I even hear anything? Like, I would give them a 2 or a 3-star rating depending on if they were entirely forgettable or there was at least a riff that I could say, oh, this is where they started to build Symphonies of Sickness.
Yeah.
And so and then I gave like probably a 4-star to the first track, Genital Grinder.
Nice.
And a 4-star to the last track, Malignant Defecation.
Ooh.
Yeah, those
Sounds
are
like a rough day.
Yeah, those are some hot numbers right there.
That's 2 rough days right around.
And it's just even better in between. You got Fester Day, Vomited Anal Tract. I mean, you got all the good ones in here.
But I will say this. Let's just say this. That record, because of that record, we have all of this grindcore that's one of the starting places of grindcore, right? Then you got all of these bands that copied that, and they have all those wild ass names like that, like Regurgitated Giblets, and you know what I mean, all that type of shit. I know that's one of their titles, but
it all comes from that first album.
Yeah, that they spawned basically. They were a hand in that, because you could go back and you could say that like Napalm Death's grindcore, right?
Sure.
And they kind of helped started that.
They were right there with
from
them.
death metal, right?
Yeah.
But we talked about this before, but just reiterating the fact that they were on a different kind of political spectrum, where these guys were like, we're going right with the most disgusting titles, mutilation.
Yeah. A large part of it too was now, and I'm going to go into this a little bit, not a lot, but Bill Steer was in both bands at the same time.
Yep.
He did the second half of the Napalm Death album, Scum, so like half written by one guitarist, and then Bill wrote the second half of it. And Bill said, he just preferred being in Carcass because there was a lot more. I mean, they don't sound too different in hindsight. Reek, Scum, probably like obnoxious grindcore.
Yeah.
But he just felt that there was more to do with Carcass with, Ken's drumming, switching up the beats.
Yeah.
There was a lot more diversity in Carcass and a lot more room for there to be a musical band versus Napalm Death. Everything's faster, heavier, more obnoxious, just noisier.
And like, whereas Carcass leaned, I believe, more towards metal, Napalm Death was leaning more towards punk rock.
Yeah.
Right? So
Punk
it's kind of like
hardcore,
grind punk, hardcore.
Yeah.
Whereas as Carcass evolved into the melodic death metal machine that it became, there was a lot more room there, because then if you listen to like later Napalm Death, it still is kind of stuck to that specific lane, right?
Yeah, they didn't really stray from the path as much.
So I'm going to let you get into this, but before we do, like, obviously love Carcass. I mean, starting with Heartwork, going back to Necroticism, I love that album.
Gem.
That album is great. But I did then put on Symphonies after Reek, and I was like, there's some jams on here.
Yeah.
Like that's a great record, actually. There's some good shit on there. Is it sloppy? Yeah, it's sloppy.
A little bit.
But, I mean, we all start somewhere. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm not really judging them on performance, their capabilities. Obviously, we're going to learn more. You're going to tell us more. But, like, whatever their capabilities of recording were at that time, we're talking, like, early 90s.
Oh, late 80s.
Late 80s.
Yeah, this 88, 89, back to back right here.
Yeah, so not too, we talked about Slayer, obviously, so not too much
further after Slayer kind of started and put their stamp on this is what extreme music, is.
Yeah.
You know,
And these guys, they were all hanging out around the time of death metal emerging, 85, right? That's the big year for death metal, right?
Yeah.
So they're all like in bands, meeting each other, tape trading, partying, and so they were around for it, but you just don't get anything on the record until like 1988. But they were there for it just the same as everybody else doing their versions of the stuff. So I put together this little essay for us here, just going through the history, and I'm just going to straight read it off the screen for you. Jay, feel free to jump in at any point in time.
Sounds good,
Just
brother.
give me a high sign or whatever.
Yep.
But
You're good. Let's get into it.
I tried to take a little walk down Jeff Walker Lane and dive into his thesaurus and dictionary a bit for you here.
Cool.
So we're going to go with Gods of Grind, from the slaughterhouse to the surgeon's scalpel, the dissection and vivisection of the history of Carcass. 1985. Some distant backwoods, unmarked and off the books, festering mess of a slaughterhouse well outside of Liverpool, England, unwittingly spawns one of the greatest metal bands of all time. Somewhere fermenting in the curds and whey of mother's milk, some dank, ill-coagulated bile, putrid beyond imagination, indescribable, indiscernible, unrecognizable, and more malignant than death itself. An abomination fresh from hell gained sentience and spilled out onto the floor of this mortal coil.
Nice. I like it.
There is nothing humble nor benign about the beginnings of Carcass. Whatever hideous force that set a course of action for Jeff Walker, Ken Owen, and Bill Steer to come together and form a band will forever remain a mystery to the world, as there could be no way of knowing that over the span of time this monstrosity would become the calculated surgeon at the top of their craft, and which many oft would dare to emulate. From the horrifying afterbirth of death metal in 1988's reek of putrefaction to the most recent effort in 2021's Torn Arteries, Carcass blazed their own trail with each and every album, making sure to simultaneously polarize and amaze their fans along the way. Be there no mistake, from the grinding wheels of the slaughterhouse of death metal to the finesse of the surgeon's carefully cultivating hands, Carcass forged their own way through their never-ending grind of pursuing the progress of their art, for their own sake, if nothing else. With each release in their career, Carcass took monumental leaps in progress to help push the boundaries of extreme music well past the relentless and incessant noise that had become death metal in the mid to late 1980s. Come one, come all, sit down beside the spinning blades as we churn the music of Carcass through the grinder. A well-preserved 35-year career, the choicest cuts, brined, cured for the masses to exhume and consume. Prepare to feast as we journey from the slaughterhouse to the surgeon's scalpel.
I like how you kind of preface this, like last week when we were talking about this, like you kind of go from the slaughterhouse, just the reckless chopping and grinding of the grindcore, all the way to like the precision of the instruments and the surgical scalpel. So I like how you did that. But before we jump into this, Carcass is also a band that we got the luxury to see, right?
We did.
Yeah. So I remember that concert. We went together, I believe. I know we were both there. So I remember just being in awe and being so glad to be able to see them. And it was one of those deals, too, where it was like they took that hiatus, and we'll talk about that. And then they came back, so we got the opportunity to actually see them perform right in Grand Rapids, right?
Yeah. So, and just real quick on that note, before I jump back in here, I remember, I believe y'all were inside still. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I went outside. I don't know. I can't recall why. But there, lo and behold, is Bill Steer just strutting across the parking lot, but he's with a security guy, right? And this security guy is like fanboying him way too hard for me to interrupt. Plus, he's security, so I don't want him to just instantly shoo me away. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. Bill's walking around. I'll just maybe catch him in a minute. He's that casual about it. Didn't get the opportunity again, and if I could do it over, I'd run right up to Bill and be like, yo, I got to shake that hand. I appreciate you so much, sir. This is before they played, so I was like, holy fucking shit, that's Bill Steer walking across the parking lot like no big deal. But that is also a testament to who Carcass is. They are not some rock stars.
Well,
they're not larger than life, and they never acted that way. They just, and then when they came to America, they were kind of treated that way. In other countries, they were kind of like, there was an expectation to be larger than life, and they weren't. They were just they didn't know how to handle it. They were like, we're just regular people playing music. So
right. And I think you get that in the metal world anyway. There's like a fine line. We're talking extreme metal. You know, a lot of these guys are accessible. They'll talk to you. They'll take 10 minutes
100%.
to shake your hand or talk to them. As long as you're not some weirdo and like, you know, on their jock or whatever, you're like actually taking the time to be sincere and be like, your music's really, you know, inspired me and influenced me over these years, and I've really enjoyed it, so thank you for doing that. You know, like, as long as you're not a weirdo, most of these guys are cool. You know, a lot of these guys, the concerts that we go to, they're hanging out at the merch booths. You know, none of these guys in extreme metal are really larger than life. You know, they're going to take the time.
I mean, I saw Gene Hoglan sitting at the bar at the intersection, just having a seat in his black robe. He might have been a drinker at the time. I don't think he drinks these days. I don't even know if he was necessarily drinking alcohol. I shouldn't say. I just know that he was sitting at the bar, and the man was so big in his black robe that nobody approached him.
Yeah.
Like, he looked too intimidating. That same show, I did get to speak with Devin Townsend. So to your point,
nice. Yeah.
like, they just float around. It's no big deal.
Right.
You know, Devin, he had like 5 or 6 people around him, a little entourage, and he spoke with everybody. Hugs and handshakes, no big deal.
Yeah, nice.
So,
Oh, yeah.
But returning to the Carcass here, so I'll go into how they all met.
Okay, cool.
From 1985 to 1988, the coagulated cesspool that would ultimately congeal into the larvae that would result in the excretion of the abomination known as Carcass would emerge. These strapping young lads would fancy themselves some tape-trading soirees just the same as the good old folk here in the continental U.S. Bill Steer and Ken Owen formed Carcass while in high school, but disbanded shortly after the inception. Bill then joined a new act by the name of Disattack. Now, Disattack was modeled after a hardcore punk band, Discharge, whose following spawned a genre in their likeness known as D-Beat, known for its use of grind beats and political brutality via Wiki.
Okay.
After Disattack's bassist quit the band, Jeff Walker of the Electro Hippies was recruited on the bass guitar. With Jeff and Bill together, the band was changed to the name Carcass, the style was changed, and Ken was asked to step in to handle the drum duties. So whereas they jammed before, Ken didn't join Disattack right away, but that drummer left, they got Ken in.
Okay.
So now you got the three of them together in Disattack, but they have a vocalist named Sanjeev handling the vocal duties. So with Jeff and Bill together, the band name was changed to Carcass. Ken stepped in to handle the drums. The band recorded a demo with the mythical vocalist known as Sanjeev before he quit, yielding vocal duties to the remaining 3 members, namely Jeff Walker as the lead vocalist. For those interested in imbibing the earliest fermentations of Carcass, please search the demo titled Flesh Ripping Sonic Torment. While nothing could seemingly be more atrocious than their debut album, Reek of Putrefaction, there in fact does exist this demo from which it was born, and I fear there is always something worse to be found once you've decided you've already found the worst thing ever. It never ends. Assuredly, there is a world of unapologetic noise worse than both of these recordings. I am not in need of being convinced.
Yeah, true. Me neither. I'm good on that.
I am a believer. If I had a predilection for such noise, I might be tempted to listen to Napalm Death's second album, Scum, which features Bill Steer on the second half of the album, and Jeff Walker's art design for the album cover.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Bill pulled double duty, balancing Napalm Death and Carcass simultaneously, but preferred the original creative process that flourished in Carcass, citing that with Napalm Death, everything was simply about being heavier and faster at all times. Throughout the 2007 documentary The Pathologist's Report, Jeff and Ken, and especially Bill, all seem to take delight in their departure from one another. Napalm Death, that is. They're all fans of the band, but when it came to doing music with them, that's where they kind of had to draw the line.
Yeah.
So it is plain to see on Bill's face that he was happy to leave Napalm Death in the dust. Bill was so keen on leaving Napalm Death, he even recruited his own replacement in Michael Amott. Amott was stoked to work with Bill and was led to believe that Napalm Death would be a dual guitar band. But when Bill dropped the bombshell that he was quitting Napalm, Amott was pretty bummed because he really only wanted to jam with Bill. Amott would later get his way and join the band after the release of their second album. He was a highly sought after guitarist by other bands of the time, so he was making the rounds before finding his way back to Ken, Jeff, and Bill. That these three would one day write and release one of the all-time greatest metal albums could not have been foreseen by Nostradamus himself, yet it would certainly be the drive of the band over the years to progress to such a point. However, before we could set our eyes on their finer delicacies of their most savory offerings, we had to wade through the murk and the brine that was the 1988 debut on Earache Records, Reek of Putrefaction. The Reek of Putrefaction is problematic in every sense. This album is awful from cover to cover, front to back, start to finish, outside to inside. It's rotten to the gore. This album is so goddamn reprehensible, I'd demand my money back if it didn't supply me with a lifetime of laughter.
You're just writing Carcass. Dude, I bought this pile of shit from you guys. You're lucky you put out, I heard Carcass Heartwork first, because I would never revisit a Carcass album after this one.
I would straight hate.
You're like, fuck it. This is Carcass? Fuck this shit.
Oh, my God. There are no redeemable qualities to this stillbirth other than the mother lived. I can't even articulate how disgusting this album sounds, how vile it looks, how revolting the words and images are contained within it. Reek of Putrefaction is one of the most unnecessary, unrewarding, unwelcome, and uncomfortable recordings ever put into permanent form.
I will say this, though. If that's the goal, you did it. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that was the goal.
I really think it was, because if you know enough about Jeff Walker, if you just listen to the man in an interview, if you just understand him a little bit, this tracks. This is exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
The only thing they didn't like about it was the production quality, which we'll touch on in a moment here.
Well, I'll just say, before you dive back into this, like, if that was the goal, like, you know, it's like, okay, it's all this gore shit. So how do we make that in audio form?
Yeah.
Here's this pile of meat and bone and rotten fucking with flies and maggots all over it.
Yeah.
That's what you get.
Yeah, and I think they were really consistent in that, and that was really the goal all along, just to do something. If you're going to do it extreme, let's go extreme all in every sense. And they, like Chuck, they wanted to do something horrifying, but not sing about the movies that you just watched last weekend or whatever's new.
Yeah.
They wanted to do something that was original and grounded in reality, but still horrifying. And so they kind of went to the Slaughterhouse and the Butcher and the medical stuff that we find to be so unnerving. Man. So, Reek of Putrefaction, this album poses more fucking questions than the Riddler on Trivia Night. Thus is the beginning of an ever-polarizing career for the gods of grind. By 1988, death metal was pretty much dead for all intents and purposes. The debut album by Carcass is the death knell for death metal. While genuine in its orchestration and pure in intent, the album's biggest problem is that it suffers massively from poor production quality. Additionally, the album is a disaster piece of songwriting, lyrical, and visual art direction. If you can make it past the cover to put this album on, then you will know what to expect of a mess on the inside. I suffered this album again just to be sure that I didn't overlook some gem, some hidden treasure, some reason to justify its existence. None could be established. And yet some will say this is the finest hour of Carcass. Some will say this is the beginning of the end of Carcass. This album isn't Frankenstein's monster. It's not the slaughterhouse that leads to the butcher's block. But it's the assembly of said horrors. It's the womb that holds those nightmares inside. It is one of the most unlistenable 40 minutes of noise strewn together, riff soup on top of the Maytag man pushing fridges across the floor.
Yep.
Fans love it.
Yep.
But the band hated the production and looked down on the album for years until they took delight in the fact that it spawned an entire genre out of its likeness. One of the album's biggest supporters was John Peel, a BBC radio DJ who declared the album to be his favorite release of 1988.
Must not heard too many releases that year.
That declaration would result in Carcass being invited to record their first Peel sessions in 1989, in which they would debut several songs from their upcoming second album. While they were disappointed in the result of the first album, they were not deterred. They knew what they had and what they wanted to do the next time around, so they got to work on their follow-up to Reek of Putrefaction, seeking out the help of Colin Richardson to create Symphonies of Sickness.
I did not know that Colin Richardson was involved in that, but that does make sense that we're talking so many leaps and bounds when you get a producer, especially of that caliber, involved in the next effort, you know?
Yeah, the first producer really couldn't care less. I didn't bother to name them. I know it was recorded at Rich Bitch Studios, so that was their first and last recording there. Then they moved on to Colin Richardson, who was at Slaughterhouse Studios. Go figure.
Nice.
So, pioneers of their own making, Carcass would drop Symphonies of Sickness on the world in 1989 after being whipped into shape by their new producer, Colin Richardson, at Slaughterhouse Studios. While its predecessor only took 4 days to record at Rich Bitch Studios, Symphonies of Sickness was recorded over 6 months' time, much of which was used to address honing their skills under the watchful eye of their new producer. Whereas the previous album was littered with 90-second to 2-minute tracks across 22 songs, the new effort delighted in longer songs and fewer of them. The progress was unpredictable to all, but natural to the members within. This was the moment in which Carcass boldly declared that they would make the music that they wanted to make. It was the first of many progressions and departures of their style to come. It was also a point in time at which the band would formally adopt their 4th member, Michael Amott. While not on the recording itself, Amott was recruited as the touring guitarist to support the album. Although Michael was looking forward to playing with Bill Steer once again, he has since stated that the songs were so difficult, both in structure and technicality, that he called his girlfriend back home in Sweden to tell her that he didn't think he was going to work out. Thankfully, it did all work out, as Carcass was gaining a lot of traction and momentum at this time. Bill recalls being offered to tour the U.S. with Death at a time in which the band had no U.S. release. They said that they were just excited to meet Chuck and that they didn't care if it was the best business decision. If Reek of Putrefaction was every suspect element that led to the Slaughterhouse, then Symphonies of Sickness was the meat-packing plant where all the magic happened. All the filth, excrement, slime, rot, and decay had all sloughed off this carcass like some husk, shed, discarded, and left to wither. What remained was a juggernaut behemoth so undeniably powerful that once again Carcass spawned an entire movement of followers in their own image. This Carcass was trimmed of fat, lean, clean, and mean, a well-oiled grinding machine. Carcass had swiftly evolved to be a cut above the rest of their peers, building on the momentum of their constantly improving musicianship. With Symphonies of Sickness, the band had cultivated their sound and refined their songwriting to an elevated tier, as well as carved out an identity and personality for themselves. Yet, they were still not satisfied with the songs and how they came out musically. They were proud of the production quality and happy with the album, but truly felt that they could write better music. They noted that the U.S. tours in support of Symphonies of Sickness revealed that some of the grind and blast beat segments of their songs lost the attention of the crowd. So they made a more conscious effort going forward to be more selective about the use of those beats. Carcass now possessed a complementary guitarist to Bill Steer and Michael Amott, and perhaps even more importantly, they were aided by a producer that genuinely liked their music in Colin Richardson. Momentum was on their side, and the progression left the members of Carcass with no choice but to trade in their butcher's aprons for even sharper, shinier tools of the trade. No longer content to cut and stitch riffs together, the band entered the studio to record their 3rd effort with an intent to focus on cohesive songwriting and push their music in a direction that they felt they needed to go. Symphonies of Sickness was, is, and will forever be a monumental death metal album for the ages. Nonetheless, Carcass would forge on again, seeking to improve upon their craft, returning to the studio in 1991 to record their 3rd album, Necroticism, Descanting the Insalubrious.
Yeah, before we jump into that, I wonder if that, we talked in the At the Gates bio episode about how, you know, when you're first getting started, you're just jumping into the studio, right? You're just recording what you can record. So maybe they just recorded with some dude that didn't even know, like they just, you know, maybe obviously their skills wasn't up to par either on the musicianship side, wanting to get everything tight, or even on the production side where a guy was just at a studio and you go to record with the first guy and he doesn't know shit about death metal, so he has no idea how it sounds. And then you get with Colin Richardson, someone who's versed in metal, and that's his world. I mean, it's what, Slaughterhouse Studio? Or
that's what it began as.
So, I mean, I know it changed after time, but, I mean, obviously he was all about the death metal. So then working with somebody else with an outside opinion, that's going to help you grow and evolve as well. You know, a lot of bands, they treat their art like a baby, right? It's my little guy. You're not going to change it, and I'm so proud of it. But if you get another guy in there giving you some direction and like giving you some ideas, you're like, okay, yeah, this is how this could be better. This is how this could appeal to more people. And obviously, playing live, like you said, you could see what the crowd's going to relate to, and you're just stitching riffs together, playing a blast beat into this. Not a whole lot of groove going on. It's just part after part. People are just staring, looking at you like, what the fuck is even going on here? Like,
I think that in all of my research too, while putting this all together and getting all this information in a pile, they said all of that and money vis-a-vis the record label. Yeah. Like, there just wasn't enough money to be sitting around in the studio. Like, you get 4 days for the first album. That makes sense too. Yeah. And they even ran into that problem with Symphonies of Sickness, where they're talking about they're putting up $20,000 of their own money just to finish tracking bass. You know, so they definitely ran into those issues. You know, people look at anybody in a band at any point in time and say, "Oh, they must be rich. They're famous. They're playing shows." I mean, Carcass is just like guys going to punch the clock 9 to 5, barely making it. Right. You know, like not really bringing home the dough. So when the record label, and it was a small record label, Earache, you know, when they run out of money and say you're on your own, like, you either put it up yourself or you're just out the whole project.
Yeah, I mean, same exact thing we talked about in the At the Gate series. You know, those guys weren't making money until way later when the album blew up, right? So it's the same kind of thing where it's like, just because we hold them on such a high pedestal and we think they're successful to us because we love their albums doesn't mean there's a monetary gain. Right. And then at that time, like, Earache was probably just getting started, which, like, kudos to them for, like, sticking it out with them and just saying, go ahead and put out this disgusting thing, and then we'll try to get another one after that.
Yeah. But and it seems like as we go forward in this story, it's going to reflect that At the Gate story a lot, and where, like, that first half, great music, no money. Yeah. Go away, come back, here's some more music. Now we're making money finally. I mean, I think that's what it would appear to be, even though I dare say none of these guys are, like, filthy rich.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. So, they don't have mansions and tour buses and, like, probably huge tour buses and shit like that.
They're a little older, been doing it a little bit longer, and they do have a good following, so they are making some money these days.
And kids, at the end of the day, do what you love and do it for the love of it, not just because it brings you money, because that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah, money, when you start to tie it to your hobbies and passions, is definitely going to kill them.
Yep, you don't live. Your life is not fulfilled just chasing those dollars all the time.
Yeah, and when you try and twist your favorite thing into something you're gonna make a living doing, you find out how quickly that's a bad idea.
Yeah,
like it's tough.
It becomes a job real fast.
Yeah. So now the first 2 Carcass albums were largely a musical collaboration between Ken Owen and Bill Steer, ironically showing each other parts from opposite instruments. Ken would write abstract chord progressions on a Spanish acoustic guitar at home, and Bill would help fit those riff patterns into beats that would fit a rhythm. All 3 members equally contributed to the lyric writing process over the course of the first 2 albums as well, mostly piggybacking on the lyrical ideas which Ken had been writing over the years since the inception of the band. By the time we reach the necroticism era, Ken had nearly exhausted himself of much of his musical contributions to the band, though still heavily involved in that process. So he wrote about half of necroticism, they made it sound like. After Amat was initially discouraged by offering up riffs which Bill shot down, citing that they sounded like riffs from their older albums, he ultimately brought in valuable material in the form of Incarnated Solvent Abuse and Corporal Jigsaw Quandary.
Both badass songs, too.
Bangers.
Yeah.
Each of these songs would be released as singles, and both would have a video to accompany them. The band remarked that the video for Incarnated Solvent Abuse is terrible, and that the entire shoot was dictated to them by the director, and they were miserable. Bill is hardly, if at all, involved in the making of this video, and is all the same entirely embarrassed by it. It is cheesy. I can't tell you what it is supposed to be about. I don't even think the director knew, to be honest. The video for Corporal Jigsaw Quandary is also a below-average quality video in which the live video shots are cobbled together to the audio track, but none of the images sync with the music very well. That's kind of lame. Here's Bill playing a solo, but he's playing rhythm on the shot. It's dumb.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, hit the button. Let's see, where did I go here? Despite the video inadequacies accompanying their tracks, Necroticism was yet another progressive development from the band. It marks the first album in which Jeff Walker exclusively handled the lyrical duties, a chore in which he prided himself in doing. The first two albums are chock full of macabre medical horror imaginings, so things only ramped up with Necroticism. The lyrics were already convoluted and grotesque from the beginning of the band, so however Jeff managed to one-up all previous efforts combined with his work on Necroticism still befuddles the gray matter. Long story short, and I'll save you the dictionary and the thesaurus, the lyrics are largely about the decomposition of the human body and the various ways to inter it into the soil of the home garden so as to fertilize it. I love it.
Me too. That's why I laugh.
And I'm telling you,
It's part of life, man. We all become the soil. I mean, shit.
And
bro.
he really goes into these lyrics so hard, like some old English shit, just like words that nobody says these words. There's not a thing you know. You got to look them up.
Yeah, they tried hard with writing those lyrics.
You could tell he was proud of it. Like, he didn't even shy away from the fact. And Jeff Walker will normally be, it's not great. It's whatever.
Yeah.
I did it. It's no big deal. But he loved his work on this, and I'm with him on that.
And you'll probably get to this, but I'm just going to put this in there too. Necroticism, the last of the work before the comeback, where the low vocals and Bill Steer's vocals were still involved on this.
Yeah. That's probably coming up in a second here. Let me find my spot. Shot full of my beginning to manage one of previous. Long story short, did that part. The entire album moved away from the band's past usage of grind beats, focusing more on grooves and clarity in the songwriting. The cover art also moved away from the gorier elements of the previous works. Carcass did what they wanted to do, not what the fans wanted or expected them to do. By the time they released this album and began doing press for it, they had already begun to distance themselves from the term death metal, and with Jeff saying at the time that whatever death metal is now, we're not that. Further, similar to punk music, Jeff would describe death metal more as an era in time rather than a genre of music. Suffice to say that many imitators followed in the wake of each of their releases. Surely they weren't the only band inspiring others to push the genre forward, but name a bigger band making more progress than Carcass was making at this time. I'll wait. Necroticism, descanting the insalubrious, built on everything the band had previously released, and it was a very well-honed, well-crafted, well-presented, well-packaged, and delivered for consumption to the masses album. Their videos were getting regular rotation on metal programs around the world, like Headbangers Ball. While the band toured and supported Necroticism, they were well underway piecing together a masterpiece in which they would seem to approach a work of art reaching beyond their grasp.
Before we jump into this, I know where we're going with this. Real quick, too, with these albums, I'm not sure with the Reek, but Symphonies, wasn't this one that had the alternative cover art too? Because wasn't it like there's a art out there that's just like a bunch of pictures of people like dead and like mutilated and everything. You know what I'm talking about? Because like this is not that.
Yeah, no, these are like re-release versions of these albums. So there's neither of these are original art, and both of these would have very similar artwork on them. Which is why I'm remiss that I left the album at home. I do own
actual vinyl.
Yeah, I own the Reek of Putrefaction vinyl, and it's got, Google it. It's got some horrifying images, front, back, everywhere. And Symphonies of Sickness is very much similar, and I think the album or the label asked them to change it so that they could at least discern a difference between the two albums.
Okay, I wasn't real sure because I just remember seeing the art for the Symphonies when I re-listened to it, and then there was the alternative art as well because it was just like so disgusting with all like the real photos and of like people dead and like basically like one of them horror websites you would go to. Like I don't like that shit. It's weird that people do, but like the whole watch people die and like I'm just not with all that shit. But
yeah, so a good thing I didn't discover this band at the wrong time. I never would have enjoyed them. I would have just turned and ran because it's it's a little beyond the pale for me at any stage in my life. Like I was not into that kind of thing. But here's a couple of Dead Kennedys Kennedys for you.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Later on down the line, even, yeah. So 3 to be exact.
By the time Carcass had entered the studio to record their 4th album for Earache Records, the band had been steadily trending both up and away. The fan base was growing despite the polarization within, as each album was further and further a departure from where they began musically. Yet, they still managed to sound like Carcass on each album. Each release showed tremendous growth in songwriting and melody additions to the songs. The presence of Michael Amott was fully realized in the dual guitar attack featured on 1993's seminal release, Heartwork. From the opening track, Buried Dreams, the mood and tone of the album is an immediate, sharp, and noticeable departure from their previous works. While still a technical, visceral metal album, gone are the Gore lyrics, gone are the grind and blast beats, save for a few moments across the album, and gone are Bill's guttural low vocals. The band had dispatched anything Gore-related. They hung up their bloody aprons, set aside the butcher's tools, set down the fine cutlery, and had fully elevated themselves to the height of their profession. The time elapsed was less than 10 years, but the distance traveled was light years from whence they came. Heartwork boasts the skilled precision of mad scientists on the edge of a major breakthrough. Around this time, many death metal bands of old were seeing heightened audiences, numbers, and extended airplay times on MTV and pop culture starting to embrace death metal. Headbangers Ball, Beavis and Butthead, and eventually Ace Ventura would all help to propel death metal into the stratosphere and out of the crematorium. What was once a hideous amalgamation of slop heaped into an undulating mass of decay had become an iconic part of the history of metal music. The success of Carcass was undeniable by this time. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end. While Carcass enjoyed the fruits of their labor by dropping another album that further progressed and built upon their previous works, Michael Amott left the band after the recording of the album. While it denotes a disappointing move for the band overall, it would later come back to serve them well. Had this not happened, then we may not have had anything more from Carcass beyond their 5th album. In the interim, the band had guitarist Mike Hickey tour with them for a brief stint before moving on from him and finding Amott's permanent replacement, Carlo Regatas. Heartwork closed out the Earache Records chapter of their career and lent the direction over to a major label deal with Columbia Records. Carcass were already 17 songs into the new endeavor when trouble began to unfold with their new record label. The demise of Carcass cannot be pinned down to one specific reason, but it all happened throughout the making of the 5th release, aptly titled Swansong. Seemingly building off of the direction of all previous works, somehow this album feels like the furthest departure of all. Yet at the same time, it feels like the very obvious and natural step after an album like Heartwork. Sadly, this album does not contain enough elements within it to be recognized as a heavy metal album. It is evident that Bill Steer was completely disenfranchised by the music and the business of it as well. This album, while a great album full of many good songs, feels more like a hard rock album than a metal album. That's my personal opinion. It contains the melodies and songwriting reminiscent of Heartwork, but there's no teeth, no bite, no sting, no sharp riffs to point to here. It's a comfy meal down home, not a thrill-seeking hunt and kill ride from the past. This album feels old, tired, bored, and dead. There's nothing daring here. This album is so polarizing because it is simply not even a metal album in my opinion. That's the frustrating part about it. It's good, but it's not metal. So it's hard to sit it beside the rest of the catalog. The band recorded the album in 1994, but the label wasn't sold on what they were hearing, going so far as to suggest that they write more songs and further have Jeff learn how to sing.
Wow. That's weird.
Yeah, it's hard to say if the label had buyer's remorse, but the band decided against both those suggestions, as well as denying the album being remixed by Terry Date. While the album was recorded and finished, the label sat on it, in which time the band moved back to Earache Records. There was concern that Columbia might not ever release the album. Although the album was eventually released and sold well, there would be no touring support as Bill Steer had quit the band around 1996. This album was produced by Colin Richardson once again. However, not even he could save this album from itself. The members would move on to other projects, and a posthumous B-sides collection was released in the form of Wake Up and Smell the Carcass in 1996. And thus a monster had fallen deep into the abyss, another casualty of the music industry, another carcass on the pyre.
I remember picking up Wake Up and Smell the Carcass. Obviously, this was after listening to Swansong, and I like Swansong. There's good songs on there. Like, I felt like the songwriting was good, but it's like there's a lot of blues influenced solos on there.
A lot of classic rock.
Yeah, it is a rock and roll album with, you couldn't say it's extreme. Is it heavy metal? Yeah.
I mean,
just because Metallica's heavy metal, so it's like, to me, it's like as heavy as that, if not, heavier. But at the same time, if you're talking about what their previous works, it's night and day compared to that. And then with the Wake Up and Smell the Carcass, there's cuts from like a lot of different things on there. I think maybe some of the Peel Sessions work is on there, a few different things. It's been a while since I listened to it, but I do remember getting that, and the cover was black, and then when you pulled out the book, then you see this, and I was like, what the fuck, man? This is crazy. They went for the jugular at the end at the end for that. They're like, let's put another blown off head on the fucking record,
Yeah, I didn't mean to like rake Swansong over the coals. And if I'm only coming from Heartwork, it seems like a natural progression. It's just one's heavier than the other, and Swansong's got some heavy-ish elements to it, but it like I said, it just has no teeth to it, and I don't hate on it. I just like to set the table fair for everybody that if I could compare it to something, I would say like Megadeth Euthanasia.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like it's just not a real heavy metal. I mean, a heavy metal album, sure, but it's not hard. It's not aggressive. It's not like it's not as visceral as anything that they had done before.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I don't want to sit here and say like I know the members or I pretend like to know what they're going through, but you could tell Bill was checked out.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say it was mailed in, but they didn't sit there and say, is this what we should be doing? Is this heavy? But if it's what they wanted to do and they like, the outcome, more power to them. I like it too.
Yeah.
But you could have just called it Black Star or Black Star Rising then and there.
Exactly. And I remember even picking up that album, and I spun it like a few times, the Black Star. That might be something we were getting into here, but I'm not really, I wasn't really a big fan of that because that was even further into the rock and roll realm. And at that time, I needed something to sink my teeth into, and I just, at that time, was just like, oh, man.
Yeah, for me, and probably likely for you too, when you get to like 95, 96, everything goes downhill. Like, the wheels come off every fucking band.
Yeah, that is true.
Like, I don't understand if it was the music industry, what happened. I mean, I know there was, like, the death of grunge, and maybe nobody knew where to go, but, like, Anthrax is putting out Stomp 442 and Volume 8. Metallica's on the Load thing. Megadeth's doing Cryptic Writings and Risk. Pantera's kind of falling off with Reinventing Yesterday. Slayer's doing Diablos and Musica. I mean, none of these albums stand up to any of those bands' previous works. None. I mean, you can't sell me on Pantera's Reinventing Yesterday being as good.
Reinventing the Steel, but
sorry,
I got you.
Yeah, Luke's band. Shout out Luke. Fuck my life. So I don't own that Pantera album. Yeah, I don't own that one, obviously. It's not as good as their previous work. And none of those
I wonder
bands.
what that was. I wonder if that was like Metallica, like they started that whole fucking thing. Like, let's cut our hair, let's do this, let's try to get some commercial success. And in hindsight, it is what it is. But now we're starting to talk about. Are we talking about new metal in 1996? Not quite yet, because that's more of a 1999 type thing.
No, you're right. No,
100%. Right? So we're not quite there yet.
We're at Korn at 1996. We're definitely at Korn Deftones.
Are taking over, right?
Yeah.
We're starting to move that.
Snot.
Yeah.
Wow. Stuck Mojo.
Oh, hell, Snot.
So
love Stuck Mojo, too.
So we, because there was nothing else, had to move into other realms.
Yeah.
There was no good metal like we were used to. Nobody was putting out the good death metal, so we had to kind of move into, and everything moved.
Yeah.
Like I said, Stuck Mojo, heavy as fuck.
Oh, yeah.
But not death metal.
No.
Not even close.
No.
Not even. So everything just shifted into like new metal territory. System of a Down, Incubus, not that those guys are metal per se, but that was...
We're getting there.
Yeah, that was kind of what was happening. Yeah.
Sepultura was on the Out and Out, whatever. And obviously, you could go in and look at albums from this era, and some of these guys, Suffocations, bands like that, they're keeping it death metal. Cannibal Corpse, they're not fucking around.
Yeah, bands like Testament and Overkill were probably keeping it true, to the thrash metal. Like they didn't veer off, like some of these other bands did. But for my part, the bands that I knew and loved all seemed to be dropping weaker albums in the mid to late 90s. It was tough. Now, for fans, there was little hope that the members of Carcass would go on to replicate their former glory years. Jeff, Ken, and Carlo teamed up with Cathedral bassist Mark Griffiths to form Black Star, which then became Black Star Rising. Yeah, I tried. I couldn't. Michael Lemont went on to form Spiritual Beggars and later Arch Enemy, while Bill departed the furthest with his Clapton-esque sounding project Firebird. Maybe that would be one I would like the most because it's the furthest removed from metal, and I wouldn't even expect it to be anything other than Clapton. That's exactly what it is. All projects are worthy rock albums, but nothing of import for Carcass fans. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Carcass fan. I could not care less about any of these other bands.
Same.
I have some appreciation for Arch Enemy,
yes,
and that is 100% only because Michael Amott has to do with it. Overall, they are a very generic, commercial thrash metal band, albeit much more successful than Carcass ever was. That's my opinion of it. Their older stuff is better, but once you get into that mid to current Arch Enemy, I'm lost. I don't care. It's just, I'd have to really try to like it. Even with Jeff Loomis on board, I have a hard time with it. So, in large part, thanks to the success of Arch Enemy, that we can credit them with the return of Carcass after their long hiatus. While Arch Enemy was riding high on their success, well earned over the course of many years and a number of albums, Amott was continuously bombarded with questions about resurrecting Carcass. This was a monumental task to pursue, as not only had Bill Steer not played metal music at all for about 15 years or more at the time, but also Ken Owen had suffered a brain hemorrhage that left him in a coma for 10 months. That was in 1999, so Ken was still recovering at this time at about 2008 in ways. Now, Ken didn't need convincing. He only needed to be able to play his drum parts like he once did. Amott was able to persuade Steer to pick up the guitar again. However, it was Ken Owen that was not able to perform as he once did due to the complications suffered from his brain hemorrhage. I know they got him up there a couple of times, maybe do a song or two, what he was capable of doing, but overall he just wasn't going to be able to, pull off maybe some Symphonies tracks or some Necroticism tracks.
That's a lot, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For
anybody. I remember even watching the Wake Up and Smell the Carcass video and being impressed by like all of the shit he was doing behind the drum kit because of them are a lot of the older songs of those performances on there,
right?
And just all the crazy changes and the amount of things he had to remember. I'm sure wasn't an easy task.
Yeah, I can see why he would have struggled to come back. Anybody, even brain hemorrhage or no,
brain hemorrhage or not.
Can you still play those?
Yeah.
Can you still play those old school drums?
Yeah.
So Amott recruited Arch Enemy drummer Daniel Erlandson to occupy the throne, and in 2007. Carcass was indeed resurrected and confirmed to have dates in 2008. While doing press along the way supporting the 2008 shows, Bill was asked about the likelihood of Carcass writing a new album, to which he basically replied, "Not likely, but it's not my call. It's up to Jeff and Michael. They are the busy ones." The band would continue with this lineup for several more years, all the way through 2012, when Michael and Daniel Erlandson left the band to focus on Arch Enemy once again. The ball had been set in motion. This Carcass was up and ambling about. Bill was ready to cook again. So, after the years of touring with Michael Amott, Bill was eager to write and record a new Carcass album. This Carcass just won't die or stay dead. Jeff and Bill discussed the idea of writing a new album, and they said that if it sounded like Carcass, they'd pursue it, and if not, they'd drop it. Fortunately, things progressed enough to a point that a new album was announced, and in 2013, the band, now featuring Daniel Wilding on drums, formerly of Trigger the Bloodshed.
Never heard of them.
Same. Dropped their 6th studio album, Surgical Steel, courtesy of Nuclear Blast Records. That's 2 of my favorite bands that Nuclear Blast helped save from the end of the day. The band would tour on this album for years, essentially featuring Ben Ash, guitarist of Pig Iron, Desolation, and Liquefied Skeleton, on the second guitar. Ben would stay with the band about 6 years, during which time the band relentlessly toured the world. As for the quality of Surgical Steel, I personally rate it fairly high, a good album, and back to metal. However, it does feel as if it's full of filler songs. There are some really great tracks on this album, but it's not a great album, all said and done. It throws back to necroticism in ways, with obvious melodic passages that harken back to Heartwork and the better parts of Swansong. I think that despite the time that was taken to craft this album, too much of it seems to be fan service for the old hats. The old, scary Carcass monster isn't as intimidating this time around, just clutters up the album with more grind that isn't complimentary of the rest of the album. Surgical Steel almost feels like the tale of two carcasses. Carcassi?
Plural.
And that it sounds like it's trying to recapture the old grind death metal sound, as well as the more melodic aspects of their past. When it comes to polarizing, this album is a Carcass album, but not all Carcass fans will enjoy it. Although it does seem to take aim at appeasing the entire fan base, the album is not entirely cohesive, despite several flashes of genius displayed throughout. As tends to be the case these days when asked if there will be a follow-up album, Jeff and Bill each basically say that they just take their time to write and make sure it sounds befitting of the name Carcass. They took their time, slowly bringing the old monster back up to speed and moving forward with progress and precision once more. In 2019, it was announced that Carcass would release a new album titled Torn Arteries. Though the announcement to release Torn Arteries was made in 2019, the album was delayed, and that pushed the release into the pandemic during 2020. Instead of releasing the album without tour support, the band opted to release Despicable, a 4-song EP containing the first single from Torn Arteries, Under the Scalpel Blade. It was more or less something for the fans to chew on while we sat around waiting to be let out of our homes or die from COVID. Thanks.
That's dark but funny.
Thanks.
Wah, wah, wah.
Here we are.
One of the two. That's what you're going to do.
We made it.
Here we are.
So, referring to his own work over the years in interviews or documentaries, you will not find Jeff Walker one to praise one work of Carcass over the other, nor will you find him agreeable to any labeling of Carcass like grindcore or death metal. It has always been in the interest of the members of Carcass to write music they enjoy and not cater to a genre or exploit a built-in fan base in the metal community. That said, they are still in want of perfecting their craft and releasing a self-proclaimed classic Carcass album. With Torn Arteries, I feel like the band have been able to reach that goal more closely than ever. While Surgical Steel was a great way to hone the chops and rediscover the grisly and gristly ways of old, Torn Arteries accomplishes a well-rounded tour through the veritable Carcass catalog, as well as introduce a few new elements that, well, they feel new as any Carcass album should. With tracks like Dance of Ixtab, Psychopomp and Circumstance March No. 1, and The Scythe's Remorseless Swing, and especially the near 10-minute-long journey, Flesh-Ripping Sonic Torment Limited, as you'll recall the name of their first demo from before Recapitrefaction. The album also does a good job of recapturing a playful element of the past by bringing back a creative way to put their rotten roll on display. The cover art is a heart made up of vegetables. As the booklet or album jacket is removed and the pages are turned, the heart can be seen rotting from one photo to the next, decomposing to the tune of a formidable melody. Is Torn Arteries the classic Carcass album? Can we even allow Jeff Walker to believe that his work is done? Should we dare allow Bill Steer to set his guitar down and walk away from metal again? Have the gods been appeased? No. Torn Arteries is not quite the classic Carcass album, which encapsulates the breadth of their rich career. It's close, razor close, but I think I'm going to need another fresh slab of meat carved out of this carcass. It is we who are not through with you, Carcass. So get to slicing and dicing those riffs, stitching in those melodies, Sewing up those choruses and putting another package of rock and roll in a box, let us cultivate this classic Carcass album as we the masses must consume.
Before we wrap this up, I just want to put my little 2 cents in here. Surgical Steel was kind of like that. Really harkens back to the At the Gates thing again, and keep hating to bring that up, but it's like such a weird parallel. It's like at war with reality when we come back. I know you went back and listened to it.
I recall I actually did listen to it, and I remembered listening to it the first time around.
Yeah.
I just couldn't ever remember listening to it.
Yeah. So good album. Like obviously
Yeah.
it probably takes an intentional listen, and I might have to do that with Surgical Steel.
Sure.
But for me, I thought it was just one of those things where it just, to what you said in this, it was cool, but maybe my expectations were so much higher. Maybe my musical taste had changed from listening to the Facelesses and the Zenith passages and
Between the Buried and Me.
between, you know what I mean, just being such on a different scope of music. It was just like, man, it's cool. I'm glad you guys are back doing it. It's way further removed from Swansong, so you're not giving me no fucking blues, heavy metal rock stuff.
Right.
But at least you're going back. There's some grind in there. Production was great.
Yeah.
Songwriting was pretty good, but nothing that just really captured me to be like, I need to keep putting this album on again. Now, Torn Arteries, that's one that I did give an intent listen to, and I do really like that album. So I might have to go back to the Surgical Steel. I never even listened to the 4-songer, but I might have to go back to the Surgical Steel and give it a real intent listen to give a good judge on it. But that's just me speaking on my first impressions or the few spins I gave it. Just nothing to really warrant my catching my ear and wanting to put this on multiple times, you know?
So for me, I mowed the lawn and I listened to the CD like a lot, a couple of summers, whatever. And it's got some great, really rich melodies on it. Like, it's hard to say, like, those melodies come straight from the Heartwork Swansong playbook, and they're good. But, there's like only 3 or 4 songs that are that melodic and reminiscent of that era. And then a lot of it seems to go back a little bit to, like, necroticism, in that it's heavy, but it doesn't feel melodic. Not even melodic in terms of what necroticism is. It almost felt like symphonies. And some of it just sounded like it's heavy, but it wasn't really well thought out, or it just wasn't as catchy, even though it was heavy.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like, we're doing that beat because we got to do that beat, because that's Carcass. We do that beat.
Yeah.
And then we jam on it. And I'm not hating on Surgical Steel whatsoever, and even myself, I would have to go back and listen to it. I just felt like some of the tracks that were not melodic were filler, and they just weren't grabbing me.
Yeah.
And whereas Torn Arteries, I didn't feel that way about, like, I didn't feel that much, that way about it. There might be a couple of filler tracks on Torn Arteries, but I just enjoy it all the way through.
Yeah,
I feel like the time that they took on that to make that album was reflected in the songwriting and just, the flow of the album.
Yep. I really like Torn Arteries.
Yeah.
Really good.
And I think that, they're going to say it's not the classic Carcass album. Maybe they're right. Maybe they want to do a better job of incorporating all of what they've done in their next album. And I'm looking forward to it. Just take one more shot at it. See if you don't nail down exactly what you've been trying to do your whole time, the whole career.
Fair, for sure.
So the life and death and resurrection of Carcass has been anything but graceful. From the Slaughterhouse of Liverpool, England in 1985 to the Torn Arteries of today, the polarizing work of Carcass pushes forward to progress into a state of equilibrium. Whether or not Carcass achieve what they desire, it is entirely in their hands. Cultivate it, grind it out, sharpen those chops, and take one more stab at it. In grind we trust.
Hell yeah. Good job with that, man.
Appreciate
I
that.
liked
Thank
it.
you.
I know what kind of work you put into that, especially busting the thesaurus out like that and putting all of those words.
I don't own that.
You've always been great with those words, so like that was fitting for you. Great job with that.
No, thanks. To be honest to the listeners, like, I love Chuck Schuldinger's lyrics, and they're like really profound and introspective and existential. But I found there to be so much fun in emulating Jeff Walker's writing. Overly wordy, pretentious, and almost clandestine or secretive in the meaning. Like, what are you even fucking saying?
Right, yeah.
So I took a lot of inspiration from Jeff's lyrical writing, and especially as you like look at Heartwork, like that as the main lyrical, like, inspiration
Yeah.
is huge. Now, the wordiness of the prior works, necroticism, symphonies, reek, a lot of words there, a lot of clinical, like WebMD type dictionary words. But when you get to Heartwork, there's a lot of big words there, a lot of new words for any reader, but there's a lot more to chew on in terms of what you're thinking about. It makes a little bit more sense what you're listening to, what the song's about. And so I just took and ran with all of their words and imagery as best as I could. Like I would normally do, I don't always try to emulate Jeff Walker. I eventually found my own way to write and get my ideas out. But yeah, I definitely try to get inside his wheelhouse for that. And it was fun, definitely.
Well, good job with that, man. Just want to thank you guys for checking out the pod today. Let us know down below what's your favorite Carcass and why. Like, drop us a comment and let us know. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And with that being said, man, keep it metal. Much love.